With Saturn moving into the sign of Pisces, things are about to get strange. The boundaries that define our consensus reality are about to be tested, making it that much harder to distinguish fact from fiction, fantasy from reality, what's real and what's not real. Combine this with Pluto moving into Aquarius in the AI situation, and we're potentially about to have a very weird mess on our hands. Luckily, Saturn moving through Pisces is not all bad. Saturn in Pisces helps us to merge the seen and unseen realms. It helps us take our greatest fantasies and our biggest dreams and ground them into reality through practical action, through discernment, through self-discipline. And so Saturn in Pisces runs a whole spectrum of experience, and that's what we're going to be talking about in today's video. And this transit is so important because it lasts for 2.5 years. And so Saturn moves into Pisces on March 7th of 2023 and doesn't fully leave this sign until February 23rd of 2026. That is a very long time to have to deal with this energy of dissolving all of our boundaries, of creating a lot of murky energy around what's real and what's tangible. And so we're going to get into this super in depth in this forecast. Because what Saturn in Pisces really does here is it brings form to the formless, but sometimes it takes what already has form and it makes it formless. And so it kind of has this balancing effect in a lot of ways. And so first and foremost, what Saturn in Pisces does is it breaks down boundaries. And so as I mentioned before, the boundaries that define our consensus reality are about to be dissolved and tested because Saturn rules our consensus agreed upon reality. It's the things that we agree are real and tangible and that exist in this existence. And so when these boundaries are broken down, it can cause a lot of difficulty. It can cause a lot of people to kind of go off into the ethers. It can cause a lot of people to detach from the consensus reality, not just in a physical way, but also in a psychological or a mental way. It can cause a lot of escapism. That escapism can take the form of substance abuse. It can take the form of spiritual bypassing. It can take the form of wanting to negate our responsibility for the physical, tangible reality and to leave it up to some sort of higher power or to some sort of higher authority. It can bring this savior mentality or savior complex where we don't want to do the work ourselves. We want to be saved by somebody outside of ourselves. And so this can cause a lot of problems. It can cause us to lack responsibility for our own situation. It can cause us to neglect responsibility or to shirk the responsibility for what we've created in our own reality, in our own lives. One of the things that Saturn does is it's a reap what you've sown type of energy. What Saturn brings in the form of hardship, what it brings in the form of lessons, what it brings in the form of difficulties, restrictions, things like that, they all come from what we have done in the past, or a lot of it comes from what we have created in the past through our own behaviors, our own actions, our own choices that we've made in this physical, tangible reality. It's not always the case, but it's mostly the case, even if we don't want to admit it. It's kind of an energy of, hey, in past cycles, over the past 7, 14, or even 30 years, I did this, that, and the other thing, and oh crap, now it's coming to pass and it's coming to fruition, and what have I built for myself here? Did I build myself something that was really solid, that's working really well, that helps me to accomplish my goals, to be the best version of myself that I can be? Or did I create a giant mess that now I either have to clean up or I have to neglect and maybe force somebody else to clean up on my behalf? That's really the Saturn energy. And with the Saturn in Pisces version of this, we're going to be more likely to lean toward wanting to let somebody else clean up the mess, especially when it comes to like the bigger picture, the broader spectrum of things. This could be an energy of looking to rulers, to governments, to higher authorities, to people, to spiritual leaders even, to clean up the mess that we've made as a society, and not wanting to take responsibility to do that in our own way and in our own lives. It's kind of like giving it up to someone else to take responsibility. It's that savior complex, that savior mentality, waiting for, the government to fix it, waiting for the space aliens to come down to help us ascend to the next dimension or whatever it is, waiting for that vibration into another alternate reality where things are better, where things are more aligned, where things are more idealistic to what we think that it should be. And it's just not going to work that way, you guys. It doesn't work that way in general, but especially with that Saturn in Pisces, that's going to lead to a giant mess. And so on a personal level, that's a big effect that we're going to see. On a societal level, that's a big effect that we could see as well. I think we're going to see a lot more energy around people wanting this disclosure, this ascension, this next big thing that's going to fix us somehow magically, and it just doesn't work that way. We have to take responsibility to create the idealistic reality, the fantasy that we envision for our lives and for our world, and we have to do that ourselves. We have to put in the hard work, the effort, the discipline. And if we do that while Saturn's in Pisces, we can change things in a big way, because Pisces helps us to see the most idealistic, most fantastical, most wonderful vision for our reality, for our future. And with Saturn there, it helps us to actually take the necessary measures and work toward that vision. It doesn't mean that we're going to have this perfect utopia at the end of this. We most certainly will not. But we can actually take measures to get closer to that in a lot of ways. And so I love that about Saturn and Pisces, and I love the compassionate energy of Pisces combined with that Saturnian discipline. This could be a lot of energy around like nonprofit organizations being founded and funded. This could be a lot of energy around grassroots efforts to put in the work to help other people, because it is a more compassionate, more interconnected, more altruistic sort of energy. And so I love that as well. This is also an energy where we could see a lot around spiritual entrepreneurship. So people taking these spiritual realms, these spiritual modalities, these spiritual understandings, and turning them into some sort of discipline, or structuring them in a way that makes them applicable to our practical reality. So it's not just like a philosophy, it's an action. It's something we can do. It's something we can live. It's something we can actually use in a practical way. And so I love that energy of this, and I love the energy of creative entrepreneurship for this as well. So taking something that's very creative, that's more fantastical, that's more non-tangible, and turning it into something that's very concrete, and maybe even creating some sort of structure or corporation around that. These things can both be very fruitful at this time. But there's a lot of other stuff going on here too that we have to kind of address. So when Saturn moves into the sign of Pisces, we're going to have to deal with the messes that we've made first. We're going to have to deal with the hard lessons that it brings. We're going to have to deal with boundary issues in our personal and collective experience. And that's going to come up, and we'll talk about that especially in the forecast for all 12 signs. And we're going to have to do that first, right? And once we do that, we can get to the more beautiful energy of taking what's not tangible and turning it into something tangible, the more beautiful energy of walking that boundary very carefully and in a very strategic way between the seen and unseen realms, and using it for something, right? Rooting ourselves in the spiritual in order to create something beautiful in the material. That's really the ultimate goal of Saturn in the sign of Pisces, and one of the best expressions of it. But to get there, there's going to be other things going on, because Saturn is a malefic energy. Saturn requires hard work. Saturn requires discipline. Saturn is hardship. Saturn is restriction. Saturn is that weight of the world we carry on our shoulders as a result of our actions collectively and individually. And so part of that is going to have to be addressed first before we can get to that goodness. In terms of kind of bringing it back a little bit to the macro level, to the more mundane, Pisces rules things like poisons and medicines. And when you think about it, these things kind of run on a spectrum already. And so with Saturn in Pisces, in Pisces in general runs on a spectrum. It rules all things and the way all things are interconnected. It has energies from all of the zodiac signs combined and merged in this very mutable, malleable, watery form. And when we look at Pisces, it rules everything from the sacred all the way to the profane. And so we have the best of the best and the worst of the worst contained in the energy and archetype of this sign. And so when we have Saturn in the sign of Pisces, and Pisces rules things like medicines and poisons, we see that these things run on a spectrum, right? So we have medications like pharmaceuticals that are absolutely also poisonous. They can become like the thing that causes the illness, or that causes even different illnesses or more illnesses through side effects, through interactions with your body and its chemistry, through the way that it changes your body's chemistry. These things very literally can be acutely poisonous as well. And when we look at even traditional medicines and things like herbs, there's a lot of herbs that, in small doses can be very helpful and very supportive to the body, but in large doses can be poisonous. And so we have this energy of poisons and medicines being merged in the sign of Pisces. And with Saturn here in this sign, we can see new rules, regulations, restrictions, things of that nature around medicines, alternative and conventional, or allopathic. And I think that we could probably see more like shortages even with like medicines or medications, like pharmaceutical medications. And we can also see a lot more around the adverse effects of certain pharmaceuticals and certain medications. And so I could see things like maybe class action lawsuits or new regulations or restrictions being imposed. I think it's going to be more grassroots, because we do know that the pharmaceutical companies are in bed with the government, very much so. And so I think that if these things occur, it's going to be more because it's impacting us on a more individual level, and the masses are no longer wanting to sit back and just take it. They want to do something about it, right? And so I think that that could be a big thing that we'll see. Also, on the other end of that spectrum, life-saving medications that we actually need could be potentially harder to come by for one reason or another. I mean, we've been having disruptions in this way with the supply chain already over the past few years. And, this could be another iteration of that. I also think that there could be an energy around, new businesses popping up around like medication, or around, almost around like alternative and spiritual forms of medicine, things of that nature. I think that that's a really positive expression of this, but I also think there's the potential that this could become more regulated as an industry. And so just kind of keeping that in mind, that there's going to be more hurdles and more hardships, but also potentially more people wanting to explore those types of modalities and more people offering it as a professional service. Speaking of poisons, Pisces also rules water. It rules the Earth's oceans and the Earth's marine life. As we have the ingress of an outer planet moving from one side and ingressing, moving into another sign, in the collective, we tend to see at those end degrees of the previous sign hints and energies and things that will manifest, that will show us what's coming up when that planet fully moves into the next sign. This tends to happen across the board always, on the collective mundane level. And so when we had Saturn at the end degrees of Aquarius, which is happening as I'm recording this, we had a major ecological catastrophe where we had a chemical explosion, an intentional burning of chemicals after a train derailment in the state of Ohio here in the United States, that caused toxins, that caused poisons to be leaked not only into the air but into the water supply. And this is going to have repercussions for years and years and years to come that we haven't even seen yet. And with Saturn in Pisces, I can only imagine how this is going to impact the rules, regulations, restrictions, the actual laws surrounding the transport of these chemicals and the safety of our water and water supply. Hopefully it'll change it for the better, but they always like to sneak in some nefarious things with that. So that's part of what we'll be seeing, is more around that. I think there could be more unfortunately, difficult circumstances involving water and the Earth's oceans that come up over the next 2.5 to 3 years, where we could see more chemical spills, where we could see more toxicity in the oceans, where we could see things like this impacting marine life in an even bigger way. And it's going to be a call to action for not just like governments and things like that, because I don't think we can rely on them to necessarily fix everything. That's that savior mentality. The government will fix it. We don't have to worry about it. Typically, they like to make things worse, in my opinion. And so it's more about us taking action on a grassroots level to work toward creating a better situation where we're not having to deal with the poisoning of our water supply, where we're not having to deal with lead in our water in the major cities, where we're not having to deal with heavy metals, arsenic, where we're not having to deal with chemical explosions that contaminate our water or that kill our marine life. And so I think that's a big thing that we'll start to see people taking more action on. I think our water is going to become more of a topic of discussion, especially the detrimental aspects of it that have been slowly building over time due to exposure to toxins, to poisons, to things like that. And so Saturn in Pisces, I think, is going to bring a lot more awareness around these things, but I think it's going to cause a lot of people to take action that could involve those nonprofit organizations like I was talking about before, because Pisces is a charitable energy. It could involve grassroots movements. It could involve a lot of things, but I think it's going to become more in our awareness, and people are going to be talking about it way more so than we already have been. And so that's going to be a big part of it. Also, because it rules, Saturn in Pisces has this energy around escapism. We could see a lot more around substance abuse and maybe new modalities or frameworks that help treat substance abuse. We might actually see an increase in substance abuse because people are going to be wanting to escape from the harshness of their everyday reality. They want to blur those boundaries. And so you could see a lot more of that. Also, this is an energy that could bring delusions and illusions to the forefront, and so we might see some people whose boundaries are being broken down a little too much, and it leads to some form of mental illness or psychosis. And so we could see a lot more around the field of mental health and a lot more around those structures coming up over the next couple of years, maybe wanting to reframe it or restructure it in some way. That could be a big part of it. And in our own lives, there could be a lot more focus on needing to structure things in a way where we have better boundaries in order to improve our mental health and our mental well-being, and having that spiritual health component as well. So not just taking care of our physical bodies and our physical well-being, or even just our mental well-being, but taking care of our spiritual health, our spiritual well-being through structuring our lives in a way where it's more disciplined around that. And so that's a big part of it as well. So beyond that, I think that this is going to be a time where we might actually see new developments in the areas of spirituality, metaphysics, physics in general, because there could be this pull or draw to wanting to understand the structure, right? That's Saturn, that lies beyond this reality, this realm that lies within these other realities that are unseen. That's Pisces. And so there could be a lot of new developments in that area that I think could be quite helpful and quite exciting for a lot of people too. And so there's a lot that can go on during Saturn's transit through the sign of Pisces. And so let's get into, I'm going to talk about the main events very briefly, and we'll get into what to focus on in your own birth chart, and then we'll get into the forecast for all 12 signs. I want to make sure I cover this more broadly to provide a really good context, because this is going to be such an important transit for so many people, and it lasts for so long. So the main events that we're going to be seeing here are March 7th, of course, Saturn enters Pisces, and on June 19th, Jupiter will sextile Saturn. This will happen only once. This is a great time for intellectual development. This is a great time for learning. This is a great time for you to focus in on what it is that you want to cultivate when it comes to a spiritual or creative discipline or a philosophical kind of framework for something along those lines. That's more tangible, that's more real. I love this energy for that. This could also be a great energy for getting things locked in around finances, especially because Jupiter will be in the sign of Taurus. If that's an area that's been unstable for you because of Uranus and the North Node transiting Taurus for the past couple of years, then this is a time where you can create some stability. Jupiter will square Saturn from 2024 all the way through 2025. That's going to be a big energy. This is the first quarter square, you guys, of the conjunction that happened, the great conjunction at the end of 2020. Think about all that happened in 2020 and in 2021. A lot of this was tied to that great conjunction, and that was what was set in motion at that time. A new era in our society, a new societal framework was set in motion at that time. And so this is going to be the first quarter square where we start to see a big manifestation physically of the challenges that were created or born out of that time, that seeding, that beginning of this new societal paradigm. And so that's going to be a big thing. That could also be a time where there could be potentially financial disruption, more so than we already have. So just kind of bear that in mind. Saturn will sextile Uranus 2025 through 2026. That's the other big major outer planet transit. This is more of a positive thing. It's kind of a restabilization after a massive, very lengthy period of destabilization that we've been going through over the past couple of years. And so it's kind of like, all right, this has happened. We see the repercussions of a lot of the things that have happened with that Jupiter square Saturn. And now we know what we need to change and modify and make pivots and adjustments to moving forward in order to restabilize. And so as a society, that will probably be the case. It doesn't mean that we will restabilize fully at that time. We won't. That won't come until at least like 2029, 2030, if not later. But that is a period where we'll start to see some of that or some moves in that direction. But on an individual level too, if you've been subject to a lot of instability and a lot of chaos, this is a time where you might be able to finally come back and restabilize. Saturn will enter Aries for the first time, May 24th of 2025. And so this is going to be the first taste of Saturn in Aries all the way through to September 1st of 2025. After that, Saturn will re-enter Pisces, where it will stay until February 13th of 2026. And it won't be making any major outer planet transits during that time, but it's still there. It's still a big energy. That's going to be that last ditch effort to get your ducks in a row, because Saturn is really about laying proper foundations or laying a proper framework in some area of our lives. It breaks down old foundations and old frameworks that are not working. It's going to dissolve them. In the case of Pisces, where all of a sudden they turn like putty into your hands. But it also helps you to build something solid that you can work off of into the future for the next 30 years, 28 to 30 years. That's the Saturn cycle. And so this is going to be that last ditch effort to do that, right? Get the foundation in a row from September 2025 through February 2026. All right, and then in terms of your individual birth chart, first and foremost, make sure you download my Astrology 101 PDF guide so you can go in and look at your chart and look at all of the major topics and themes that will be associated with what we're about to talk about here. So in your individual birth chart, once you've downloaded the Astrology 101 PDF guide and pulled up your birth chart based on the instructions in that guide through the free software on astro.com, you're going to want to look to see which planets you have in the sign of Pisces. Those planets are going to be subject to the most intense boundary setting, the most intense limitations, restrictions, the most intense lessons, and the most hard work. You're going to have to put in a lot of extra effort involving those topics and themes and significations that are tied to those planets. You're also going to want to look at which signs those planets rule and which houses are occupied by those signs. Those houses are also going to be activated. And so those houses that are ruled by those planets that are in the sign of Pisces are also going to be subject to limitation, restriction, additional responsibility, additional hard work, additional hardship. It doesn't mean that it's bad. It just means that you're going to have this energy of delayed gratification where you're setting a foundation for the future to reach an attainable goal, but to do so the right way and not the fast way. That's Saturn. And so looking at the significations of those houses, that's going to be an area that's going to be subject to those energies. Next, you want to look and see which planets you have in mutable signs. And so the mutable signs are Pisces, Virgo, Sagittarius and Gemini. And so the planets that you have in those mutable signs are going to be subject to the most challenge, the most heavy energy of this Saturn square. They're going to be the most imposed upon by heavy burdens, limitations, and restrictions. And so the significations of those planets are going to be tied in with that. You're also going to want to look at those planets and which signs they rule. The signs that are the houses that are occupied by those signs are also going to be subject to those same extra potent challenges, extra crunchy energies. And so you're going to want to pay attention to the significations of those houses and how that's going to play into regulations, restrictions, rules, responsibilities, hardships, lessons, and delays. And also how you can potentially overcome those energies over the next 2.5 years by working really hard and being self-aware and self-disciplined. Finally, you're going to want to look at planets that are in the signs of Cancer and Scorpio. These are where you're going to have the good energies. This is where you're going to slowly and steadily make big moves. You're going to accomplish your goals in a big way. This is where you get something solid and you build it from the ground up. I love this energy. Anytime Saturn trines anything in your chart, you're going to create something positive and long lasting, that's stable, that stands the test of time. And that's what's going to happen to the planets that are in the signs of Cancer and Scorpio. You're also going to want to look again at which signs are ruled by those planets and which houses are occupied by those signs. Those houses that are ruled by those planets are also going to be subject to this positive, very gradual, restabilizing, strengthening, building, supportive energy that lasts and stands the test of time. And so you're going to want to look at those topics and significations in the Astrology 101 PDF guide as well. All right, so that's what I have for you for the general overview. Let's get into the forecast for all 12 zodiac signs. For Aries and for Aries rising, Saturn's transit through the sign of Pisces is truly bringing a time of endings. This is also going to be an increased period of solitude and seclusion, either by choice or by design. So when Saturn transits the 12th house, so this is especially true for Aries rising people, this is a time of letting go of a lot of old karma, old cycles, old patterns that you've been carrying forward, not just in this lifetime, but in previous lifetimes as well. This is an excellent time period to do a past life regression, to do some sort of hypnosis, to do some sort of transcendental meditation, to do anything that's going to get you in touch with unseen realms, and that's going to help you to understand the negative patterns that you've been carrying forward that no longer serve you, that you no longer need to carry forward into the future. With Saturn into the sign of Pisces, this is also a time where you might find yourself craving solitude or craving seclusion. You might crave a lot more downtime and alone time. Saturn in Pisces sometimes forces downtime and alone time by making it so that way you have to be more solitary. You have to be more on your own. You have to spend more time in contemplation and in deep thought and introspection. That's the nature of Saturn in the 12th house. This can come through the form of outside circumstances that throw you into this period, or again, it could just be this internal impulse toward spending more time on your own, spending more time reflecting. This is a time of personal exploration and deep spiritual exploration. This is a time where it would be very fruitful for you to engage in some sort of new spiritual discipline or spiritual study that can provide a framework for what you're experiencing in the real world. This is a time where people who are Aries rising, who are definitely typically more motivated, more externalized, more extroverted, are going to be wanting to take that time alone, but it's also going to be a time when you're going to be maybe a little less connected to the physical realm. You're going to be feeling a little less motivated to build and create. That's because you're about to be preparing for a brand new cycle of building and creation when Saturn moves into your sign in Aries. That's going to be the big cosmic reset, where anything that's not you, anything that's not connected to your true desires, your true values, who you truly are out in the world, anything that you've been carrying with you as almost like a facade because that's what people expect of you, that's going to be broken down and torn away. And so you're going through this process as a precursor to let go of these old energies, these old cycles, and to get kind of your ducks in a row internally and subconsciously before you have to go out into the world and take action on these things. And so that's a big part of what's going on for Aries. Some Aries rising people and Aries sun and moon people might find themselves faced with having to deal with illness, either their own or the illness of other people. It might be a period of deep and profound healing that takes a lot of work, a lot of energy, a lot of self-discipline in order to master, in order to get there. It's not going to probably happen as quickly as you might want it to, but it will happen. And this is a time where your creativity could deepen. This could be you creating some sort of structure or form around your creative process. And so that's the biggest energy that's happening for Aries. For Taurus and for Taurus rising. So for Taurus, this is happening in your 11th house, which is the house of friends, social networks, and people you surround yourself with by choice. If you have bad boundaries in these areas, then this is the time when you're going to need to get very clear on what you want, need, and actually require in your friendships, in your social connections, in all of your relationships. And so this is a time where you might be cutting cords or restricting your social circle in a lot of ways. This could come through the form of hardship, through difficulty in interactions with certain friends, certain people, certain groups of people, certain clubs, certain organizations, where all of a sudden you realize that this is more burden than it's worth to carry on these social niceties or to continue on with these relationships. This could also come through just deep introspection and understanding through being faced with hardship, being faced with difficulties, being faced with restraint, that like some people just don't have your back and these people are not loyal. They're not going to be with you for the test of time. And so this could be a period of purging and letting those people go. In terms of your relationships that are really solid and have a really good foundation, this is going to be a time of getting clarity around boundaries and deepening and solidifying those relationships, making them stronger so they last for that next 30-year cycle of Saturn. In fact, new friendships, new connections, new relationships that come in while Saturn is in this sign of Pisces tend to be very, very long lasting. These are people that will be with you to the end. And so new relationships that come in will be fewer and more far between, but they're going to be more reliable, more dependable, and they're going to be very strong. This is also a time where you can deepen and strengthen your one-on-one relationships by creating new commitments in those partnerships. And so this could be a time where you want to recommit yourself to your marriage partner. This could be a time where you want to commit yourself to a partner who's not your marriage partner. So you want to get more serious and maybe think about marriage or think about taking things to the next step when it comes to, taking on more responsibility in that partnership in a very easy way, though. It's going to feel easy. It's going to feel seamless. It's going to feel natural. Again, new relationships romantically that come in are going to be more likely to be long lasting. They might not last forever, but they're more likely to be so. This is also a time where I would say that your relationships, especially your social connections in general, will be tested due to that lack of boundary setting. And so you're going to see very clearly where you need to have better boundaries with your friends and social connections and where you maybe need to loosen it up a little bit. This is going to become an issue, especially for those of you who are prone to giving, and who are not so comfortable with receiving. So it's going to be very clear where you've been taking on too much responsibility for other people and other people's stuff, and that's going to come down and weigh on you. And so again, that's going to be where you're going to be looking at creating better boundaries in relationships where the foundation's not been solid. And this is where you're going to be looking at letting go of relationships where the foundation is not solid and the boundaries are too loose and it's just not working for you. I would say that you could have challenges that come up within your social circle that you feel like you have to take responsibility for. Sometimes that might be the case where you actually do need to take that responsibility, and sometimes it might not. So it just kind of depends on the nature of that relationship and whether it's solid. And it'll become clear once you act whether or not it's solid or not, and whether or not you should be carrying forward with it. But this can indicate difficulty, challenges, hardships, limitations, and restrictions that are literally impacting your friends, and so by proxy, they're impacting you. I would say also for Taurus, this is a great time for networking, for business, and for professional reasons. So this is one of the best times to meet friends through your work. So your colleagues can become really great friends that stand the test of time. Again, like that's what happened for me personally when I had Saturn transiting my 11th. I made a lot of really incredible friends through my job, and they're still very close friends of mine many, many years later. And so that could be part of this energy too. So networking and connecting with people in the workplace because of that Saturnian component, and just because that's what the 11th house also represents. For Gemini and for Gemini rising. So for Gemini, this energy is happening in your 10th house, which is the house of career and public reputation. For Geminis, it might be feeling like pulling teeth, just getting through and making things happen with your work, especially at the beginning of the Saturn and Pisces transit. It's kind of like you have all these big career goals and plans, and they're being stifled, they're being restricted, they're being limited, they're being delayed. Delays, delays, delays. That's what Saturn brings. And so it's going to allow you to progress forward, but it's going to force you to take your time and to do things the right way and not the fast way when it comes to your work, when it comes to especially your big picture career goals and plans. You might have a boss or a superior or somebody who's in a position of authority that might lay down the law and cause things to take a little bit more time. But typically, in most circumstances, again, this doesn't apply to everyone though, because we have to look at your individual chart, but in most circumstances, this is going to be for the better in the long term. It's kind of like you were rushing forward into something. You're pissed off at your boss from stopping you or from thwarting your efforts or from saying no. But in the end, when it's all said and done, you're like, wow, I'm really glad that I didn't rush and that I did it this other way instead. This could also be you realizing that there's too much burden, too much hardship, or that you're not having really clear, appropriate boundaries with your work. So you might need to recreate your work-life balance. You might be escaping into work because of other areas of your life, of other things going on in your life. Work could be an actual escape, or work could just feel like a lot of work and a lot of burden at this time. So you might want to evaluate that in some way and make changes very slowly, not just like quitting this isn't an energy of just quitting your job all willy-nilly and just ending things and going wild with it. This is an energy of looking at your boundaries and adjusting them because they're more malleable right now. They're more pliable. So you can maybe work a little bit less or change the responsibilities that you're taking on. Again, slowly over time, not just leaving a giant mess for other people to have to clean up for you. That's going to make a giant problem for you for the next 30 years, so you don't necessarily want to go that route. Often when I see people who are older and who are reaching their retirement years, when Saturn moves through their 10th house, they'll either reduce their workload and responsibility, they will reduce their time at work and go down to part-time. That's actually something that happened with my own mom when she had this transit right before her retirement. She went down to part-time. And so it could be looking at how you're going to structure things and what you need to do in order to move on to that next phase in your career. And for some people who are a little bit older, this might be like looking at retirement. And for those of you who are a little bit younger, this is maybe looking at how you need to restructure your career and your goals for the next 30-year cycle of Saturn, because something here is not working. There's a foundation that's absolutely just murky and unclear, and it's not going very well for you, and you need to reinforce that or change it and create something new. If you are looking to leave a job, it's probably going to take longer than you might want it to. If you're looking to start a new career path, it's probably going to take longer than you want it to, but the end results of this are going to be very long lasting and very positive, so long as you are patient, you don't rush, you don't push things, and you take your time. Okay, and for Cancer and for Cancer rising. So for Cancer, Saturn is transiting your 9th house, which is the house of a lot of different things. It's the house of your perspective on the world. It's the house that frames your reality through your moral and ethical value systems, through your religious beliefs and practices. And so with Saturn transiting your 9th house, it could be creating some sort of discipline about around some sort of religious study or religious practice or spiritual study or philosophical study. This could also be you maybe wanting to go back to school or having some sort of delay when it comes to higher education, where it takes a little bit more time, a little bit more effort, but you're able to, usually by the end of the transit, depending on the give or take, depending on what's going on in your personal chart. But usually with a Saturn transit through the 9th, if you're wanting to go back to school, there's like delays and hurdles before you actually get there. And so it takes longer for you to actually get back into the school or get back into that than it normally would. If you're already in school, it could actually delay your graduation or cause extra hardships or burdens where you have to work extra hard to accomplish your educational goals, where it takes, again, a little bit longer or you have to work a little bit harder. With this energy of Saturn and Pisces, there could be a lot around religious dogma and potentially some sort of malefic or challenging energy around your connection to religion or connection to your whatever philosophy that frames your reality that you adhere to. There could be a conflict involving like your ethical and moral value systems that's weighing on you, or you could find that you have very loose morals or loose values and you don't really stand for anything because that Pisces energy in your 9th house, and you want to get more clear and more stringent on that. And so that could be part of this energy too. This could be an energy around travel that causes delays, where maybe you have this big travel goal or you want to do something involving a foreign country or foreign entity, and you're able to do it, but it just, again, takes much longer. This is a good energy, though, for connecting or solidifying your relationships that are connected to your value system in some way. So looking at your integrity and the relationships that you have that are within that integrity, or that have a lot of integrity, or with people who adhere to or share similar values. This is a really great time for you to create longevity in those relationships by working very hard on the foundations for those connections. And this is also a really great time for you to take your moral, ethical, philosophical, and especially religious and spiritual value systems and translate that into how you act and how you go about engaging with the world, how you show up in this reality. For Leo and for Leo rising. So for Leo, Saturn in your 8th house, this is an interesting one, especially in Pisces. It's almost like there's this spiritual energy or this like spiritual experience that you have around death. It's almost as if there is like a fear of death that needs to be overcome through some sort of transcendent experience, or some sort of spiritual experience, or some sort of experience that takes you beyond the boundaries and confines of our objective, normal, material reality. And so Saturn in the 8th house often brings up fear around death. It doesn't necessarily mean that anyone dies. That's definitely not what I'm saying here. But sometimes there can be a fear around either your own death or the death of someone else, or this sudden awareness that you're not immortal and that you're not going to live forever, and that having to come to terms with that. And with that energy of Pisces, the coming to terms with that is going to involve your spiritual practice, your spiritual concepts, your spirituality in general, and your connection to that. This is also a time where you might have to create some better boundaries around your finances, especially joint finances involving a partner, involving debt, involving taxes, involving inheritance. This is a time where if you do get into debt, it's going to take way longer than you might want it to pay it off. So you're going to have to work way harder, and it's going to take much, much longer. So I never typically advise my clients to get into debt when Saturn's transiting the 8th house, and so I'm advising you the same, although everyone is different and your chart might be expressing a little differently, so that's not an across-the-board statement. This is also a time where you might have difficulties with debt collectors, with tax collectors, with the IRS. And so you want to have an awareness around that just in case. This is a time where your partner's resources might become more limited or restricted, or he or she might have to work harder for their earnings, or you might have to take on more responsibility on their behalf. And so that could be part of it too. This could also be you taking responsibility of somebody's inheritance through like dealing with their will, or their life insurance, or your own life insurance. All of these things are under this realm. But over the next couple of years, this would be a really great time for you to work really hard to pay off debt. So not taking on debt, but like this is where if you're in debt, it's going to come and it's going to start to bite you. And you're going to be like, all right, I created this foundation of, essentially servitude. Like I am responsible for this money now. And what am I going to do about it, right? How am I going to fix this? And so this is a time for you to work really hard, very slowly and gradually to pay off debts and to get your ducks in a row financially. And that will serve you in a very big, very positive way for the next 30-year cycle of Saturn in general. So there you go. For Virgo and for Virgo rising. So for Virgo, this energy is happening in your 7th house, which is the house of relationships. This is a time where you're going to get very clear on your boundaries in all of your close personal relationships, especially your romantic relationships, especially marriage partnerships or long-term partnerships. This is where you're going to have to get very clear on whether or not you want to be in partnership with certain people or in connection with certain people for the long term. If it's not long-lasting, if it's not somebody that you could see as marriage potential, if it's not somebody you could see growing old with, and that includes not just marriage partners, but like close friendships, business associates, things like that. If you can't see this lasting 30 years or longer, this is a time where you're not going to be into it. You're just going to be like, all right, I'm cutting cords with this. I'm dissolving this contract. I am, leaving this partner because what I want is something that's stable and that's long lasting. And so this is where certain couples will come into hardship, and I'm not going to sugarcoat that because it is the case. Not every couple. For a lot of people, this can be a really beautiful time of looking at the long term in your relationship and really planning for the future and getting more responsible and taking on more responsibility in your partnership. This is a time where I see a lot of women in particular get pregnant because it's taking on a new level of responsibility in their partnership, sometimes men too. And so it can be that, right? Taking on a new responsibility in a partnership, but it could also be looking at that partnership and saying, wow, I had rose-colored glasses on because this is Pisces. And all of a sudden the reality hits you. You see things very clearly and very realistically, and you're like, this is not the right partnership for me. This is not the right situation for me. Our foundations are not at all solid, and you have to work on letting go of that. And when I say work on letting go of that, because with Saturn, it's not just a clean break. It's not just you off and run away. It's that you have to take responsibility for what you've created together as you move on, as you move forward. So it kind of is a longer, more drawn out process. This is a really important time where any new contracts, agreements, relationships that you get into, especially those contracts and agreements, they are going to be very long lasting. And so you want to make sure that you're very clear that this is what you want. It's going to be hard to have clear understanding and clear boundaries, but this is going to give you more, I would say this would help you to view your agreements and contracts more realistically than you normally would be able to. Even though you're a Virgo, you're very discerning, this is an area where you could lack discernment or lack judgment or kind of view things from this more idealistic perspective or an overly negative and overly critical perspective, depending on the situation and the person. And so this is where you're going to be very clear on things more so than normal, but it's still not going to be easy to get clear on things. So there could be murky waters, murky understandings, murky boundaries involving contracts, and those contracts could stay essentially forever if you're not careful. So you want to be very clear if you sign on the dotted line, if you get into an agreement or a collaboration with someone. Other than that, this is a really great time, again, for just creating and cultivating long-lasting partnerships and for facilitating greater longevity and a stronger, much more clear, much more realistic foundation for the future with your partner. For Libra and for Libra rising. So for Libra, Saturn is transiting your 6th house, which is the house of health, work, and daily routines. Your day-to-day routines, your day-to-day work life can feel much more burdensome. However, this is one of those times where the things that you're doing behind the scenes on a day-to-day basis can really accelerate your growth for the long term when it comes to your bigger career goals and plans. And so you want to take this seriously. This is a time for Libras where normally your days are a little bit more malleable, a little bit more fluid. You kind of want to go with the flow and have space for that. Saturn comes in and says, no, you need to actually have some more discipline here. It helps you to look at your habits, your patterns when it comes to your health, when it comes to your work, when it comes to everything you're doing in your day-to-day life. It helps you to look at that more realistically. It helps you to look at where you need more structure, where you need more form, where you need more discipline. And this could come in the form of some sort of hardship involving your work where all of a sudden you get reprimanded or something happens and it forces you to change your ways, or this could come in the form of difficulties with your health. That's not going to happen for every Libra or every Libra rising. Definitely not the case, but you could find that it's a little bit harder for you to attain the level of physical wellness that you normally are able to attain. So you're going to have to work harder at it. You're going to have to take more time. You're going to have to be more disciplined. You're going to have to look at it more realistically in a very material, tangible way, as opposed to just kind of going with the flow. This is a time to look at more conventional types of remedies, or even like traditional medicine especially, but like doing something real, right? Doing something tangible, doing something physical for your health, and getting into a very disciplined health routine. If you're able to do this and put in the work, then you could have really great benefits now and well into the future. This is also a time where you might have to take on the burden of responsibility for caregiving. This could come through the form of a new pet, because that's the 6th house, but this could also be like someone in your life who falls ill or needs a little bit of extra help, and all of a sudden you're playing this caregiver role when you weren't before, and that takes on an extra level of burden and responsibility when it comes to your day-to-day routines. If you're already in that role and you don't have good boundaries, then this is going to come up, and you're going to be like, all right, I've taken on this role as the caregiver in this situation, but I have not had good boundaries, and this is impacting my physical health, right? This is impacting my emotional and physical health, and I'm not able to get done what I need to get done for myself. And so this is where you're going to have to become very clear on your boundaries in those types of situations. And new situations that come in like this might just come in boundaryless, and you're going to have to deal with that as well. So finding really good boundaries when it comes to that type of situation is going to be very important. This could be a really incredible time for you to absolutely supercharge your health, to absolutely supercharge your career, to absolutely supercharge those types of roles and relationships that we just talked about. But you're going to have to put in the work, and it's going to take time, and it's not going to come as quickly as you want it to, but it will come. And so that's the light at the end of the tunnel here for Saturn in the sign of Pisces. For Scorpio and for Scorpio rising, Saturn is transiting your 5th house, which is the house of joy. It's the house of fun. It's the house of play. It's the house of the things that you do because they're connected to your heart, because you love to do them. With Saturn transiting the 5th house, it could feel like there are limitations and restrictions around your ability to connect with your passions, to connect with the things that you love. However, this happens to be one of the best times to take the things you love and to incorporate them into your day-to-day experience in a structured way. This is also one of the best times to engage in entrepreneurship, especially around your hobbies and the things that you love to do. And so this could be taking something that's a passion of yours and turning it into work, turning it into a side hustle of some kind. Now is a time where that could become much more fruitful for you than it normally would be. The 5th house is also the house of children. And so there could be limitations, restrictions, hardships, or extra burdens placed around your relationship with your children. That doesn't necessarily mean that something bad will happen to your children. That's not what I'm saying at all. But what I'm saying here is that it could feel like your time with them is more restricted or limited in some way. There could actually be restrictions or limitations on your time with them due to extenuating like outside circumstances. Or it could feel like raising your children is a lot more work than it normally is. So all of a sudden, it feels like the day-to-day reality of raising your kids is a lot more responsibility than it normally would be, or that it normally was prior to this time period. This could also be an energy of feeling like your responsibilities that you have for your children are preventing you from connecting with your passions, your heart, the things that you love to do, the things that make you you. And so this is a time where you're going to have to work on having better boundaries with childcare and with your children and your relationship with them, and having better structure around making sure you have the ability to do the things that you love, and to connect with your passions, with your creativity. And so all of these things might be a potential for Scorpio. The other things that could happen here are, the fifth house rules romance. It rules sexuality. And so there could be limitations and restrictions imposed on those areas of your life where it might feel like you're not having a lot of luck in romance, or it could feel like you're just not really into it right now. And romance in and of itself, and dating especially, could feel a lot more like a burden, a lot more like work than it normally does. It doesn't feel as fun or as spontaneous as it normally would. And so it could feel like this is a heavier energy. However, that being said, this is one of the times when your flings, your love affairs, your boyfriend, girlfriend, kind of dating relationships can be taken to the next level a lot more easily, because one of the reasons you're not really that into dating around and, doing those types of things is because during this time, you're looking for something more serious. You're looking for longevity. You're looking for stability. And so this is a time where it's a lot more, it's a lot easier to take those romantic partnerships and turn them into something long-term. But if they're not something that has that long-term potential, you're just not going to be feeling it. It's going to be feeling like a lot more effort than it's worth. And so that's something to pay attention to as well for Scorpio and Scorpio rising. But this is a really great time to facilitate greater longevity in your current relationships, to reestablish really solid foundations, really good boundaries, and just a lot of looking at taking things more seriously in your relationships. That can come a lot more easily. So making sure that they're loyal, they're dependable, that they stand the test of time, for re-solidifying your foundations there. And, maybe even re-solidifying foundations for romance. This could be a time where you might have to actually establish a romance routine or establish a date night, like actually make it a habit to engage in romance with your partner in order to keep that spark alive. And so that's a big part of what's going on for Scorpio. I should also say for Scorpio that this is one of the better times to incorporate your passions and the things you love into your day-to-day experience. And in general, your health, your not just your health, but like who you are and the way you show up in the world is going to become much more stable. You're going to feel much more stable and much more grounded throughout this time. And so it can be very positive in that way as well. For Sagittarius and Sagittarius rising. So for Sagittarius, this is happening in your fourth house, which is the house of home, family, property, and real estate. It's the house of the things that you come home to after work. It's the house of not just your family, but it rules your parents. It rules a lot of different things. And so a few different things here for Sagittarius. With Saturn transiting your fourth house, your home life could feel a little bit more limiting or a little bit more like a burden, or you might have to take on more burdens and responsibilities in your home. It could also be that there's some sort of difficulty or challenge or hardship involving your property, your very physical home, that you have to take care of, and it takes a lot more work. It's a lot harder to do than you want it to be, and it takes more time than you want it to take, but eventually it gets done, and it gets done the right way because you're taking the right measures, you're making sure that you're following the rules, you're making sure that you're taking the appropriate steps in the appropriate order in order to make sure that, let's say, if there's something wrong with the foundation of your home, very literally, which could be the case, maybe there was water involved with Pisces, you're going to have to make sure that you repair that foundation in a very deliberate way, that you're making sure that you're doing your own research to make sure that it's done properly, that you're hiring the right people, and that you're taking your time with it instead of just doing a quick fix and putting some putty over it so that way people don't see it. With Saturn transiting through Pisces, this is also a time where you might have to take on additional responsibilities when it comes to family and family relationships. This is one of the most common transits I see for women who get pregnant, especially intentional pregnancies, because this is taking on an additional responsibility in the home and with your family. Very literally, it's starting a family or adding to your family, and children are a responsibility. This is also, sometimes I see this transit for people if they have to take on the responsibility for caring for their parents. Saturn is chronology. It rules time. It shows us our own mortality, and it makes us aware of the mortality of other people. And so it makes it very apparent, if you have parents that are older, that they're becoming older or that they're not going to be here forever. So you might want to take on the responsibility to move closer to them or move them into your home. You might want to take on responsibility for a caregiving role or for helping them out a little bit more. Or you might just want to spend more time with them because you know that your time is limited. And that in and of itself can sometimes feel a little bit burdensome. Not that it's always the case, but we all have, issues with our families and with our parents. And so that could be another thing that comes up for you. This is also a time where you might want to be looking at creating a really solid foundation for what goes on after work and after your working years. So you might be doing retirement planning. That's a really important thing to do while Saturn's transiting that fourth house, especially if you are nearing retirement age. You might be really thinking about this and what you want that to look like. And even if you're not, this is a time where you might be getting into planning for your retirement. And so that's a big part of this energy as well. During this time, relationships that are not set up with a solid foundation are going to become much more apparent, and it's going to become much more burdensome, especially family relationships, but all relationships. And so you might be working on letting go of certain connections during this time. It might feel like just connecting with other people in general is more burdensome, especially in that one-on-one close basis. But the ones that are really solid, you're going to have to put a little bit more effort into those connections in order to keep them going and in order to keep them solid moving forward. This is a time where you're going to feel like you have a lot more personal responsibility. There could be limitations and restrictions physically on you, maybe even due to health issues or working on your health. This is a time where you're going to have to work harder on what's going on behind the scenes and in your relationships and in your physical body in order to create what you want for yourself when it comes to your goals and aspirations and all of that in your career and what you're doing out in the world, out in the public eye. But if you do all this, if you put in all the work, the benefits are going to be exponential over the next 30 years. And so work really hard, get your foundations in a row, and you'll start to see the benefits, especially after Saturn leaves the sign of Pisces. For Capricorn and Capricorn rising. So for Capricorn, Saturn is transiting your third house, which is the house of travel, especially short distance travel and transportation and your day-to-day commute. And so something I often see with Saturn transiting the third house that's a little bit more mundane but still applicable and relevant is some sort of difficulty or hardship involving not only your commute, so it could be that you realize your commute is way too long and you need to restructure that and set better boundaries for that, or the way that you get to and from places, so your vehicle, your mode of transportation. It could be that it's too old and it's breaking down and you need to save up or work toward getting a new vehicle or get work done on that vehicle. It could be that you need to get a vehicle that's much more reliable or much more practical. Maybe you had a midlife crisis and got like a sports car and you're realizing, oh, my kids don't fit in the back seat. I need to get an SUV. That could be part of this too. But it's really about looking at like the practical aspects of your day-to-day travel and day-to-day routines there. There could also be limitations, hardships, challenges involving your neighbors or your neighborhood that come up that need to be resolved. They can be resolved through one-on-one connection and interpersonal interaction as opposed to, just harboring resentments. So make sure that you don't try to escape from those situations and just ignore them. Make sure you face those situations head on. This is also where you might want to take on more responsibility in your community and in your immediate environment and in your neighborhood. And so you might want to form some sort of grassroots organization. You might want to join some sort of organization. You might want to do something to improve your immediate environment, your neighborhood, your surroundings. This is also a time where you might want to go back and get additional education. It could be even like higher education. Sometimes that happens as well, but it could be as simple as wanting to get some sort of certification for something, so that way you can move on to your bigger career goals and plans. This is a great time for it, but make sure that you have your ducks in a row and you do it the right way and you don't speed through it. Saturn requires that you do it the right way and not the fast way. And if you try to jump in too quickly to something and it's not the right thing, Saturn's going to put up those red lights, those brakes. It's going to make sure that you aren't able to do that. And so it's going to delay your progress. So you want to make sure that you're doing your homework there. But other than that, this is a pretty nice transit for Capricorn. It's your ruling sign. It's going to be sextiling your ascendant, sun, or moon. You're going to feel much more stable, much more grounded, much more solid throughout this time. You're going to be able to be much more hardworking, much more disciplined, much more Capricornian. And that's going to translate to much more solid and stable and beneficial relationships for you as well. For Aquarius and Aquarius rising. So for Aquarius, this is happening in your second house, which is the house of money, finances. It's the house of material possessions. When Saturn transits your second house, when people know that Saturn's transiting their second house, I should say, they tend to panic. They think that they're going to go broke. They're not going to have any money. They're going to live out on the streets or something. That is absolutely mostly not the case, right? That's a very unlikely scenario. What does tend to happen when Saturn transits through your second house, and in the sign of Pisces especially, you're going to have to get much more clarity on your boundaries with your money and on what's going on with your financial situation. Aquarius rising people in particular are notorious for not really worrying about those things. Money just comes in when you need it. It flows out when you don't need it. Now's a time when that's not going to happen without effort, without hard work, and without actually paying attention to the numbers. And so living on a budget, making sure that you understand what's going on with your finances, that's first and foremost the most important thing. Getting very clear on your financial goals, that's going to be very important over the next 2.5 years. Also, it could be that your money is limited or restricted in some way, but it could be because you're saving money, right? You're putting away money for the future. Delayed gratification is a Saturn thing, and in the second house, you're learning the value of delayed gratification. Working hard for your resources, but also being very mindful of how you're using them and saving money in the present by foregoing gratification, so that way you can get something that's going to be even more gratifying or even more important for you in the future. I see this transit very commonly in people who are saving to buy a house, or saving for their children's college education, or saving for something else that's more responsible and practical and important. It could be for some people that your money is limited for some reason, where your income is reduced, but that doesn't mean that you're going to be completely out of money or something like that. It just means that you're going to be needing to be much more clear and specific and deliberate with your spending and with your saving. This is also a time for you to get very clear on your financial future. So this is one of the best times to seek help from a financial advisor or a financial planner. You want to really look at what the next 30-year cycle of Saturn is going to look like for you financially, so you can set up really good foundations now to make sure that you can build wealth very steadily into the future. That's the Saturnian energy. Okay, and finally for Pisces. Pisces and Pisces rising, this is in your sign. So Saturn in your sign is a big reap what you've sown type of energy. It's always a reap what you've sown energy for Saturn, whenever it's transiting anything, but when it's transiting your sign, it's even more so. Anything that you have chosen to anything that you have created through your behavior, through your choices, through deliberate intentional action over the past 7, 14, or even 30 years, you're going to have to come to terms with that. And so that could be a really beautiful thing for a lot of people, because anything that you've created of value, anything you've created that's really solid, anything that you've created that's really good, you've been working so hard on for so long, you're going to start to actually get the rewards, the benefits, the value of that in a big way. That's going to be coming back to you, returning to you tenfold right now. However, anything that you've created out of your own choices, deliberate actions, behaviors, etc., that is not of value, that is not good for you, that is not good for humanity, that's going to come back on you, and you're going to have to deal with that. You're going to have to take responsibility for what you have created in your life, and you're going to have to work on fixing it, or work on letting go of it, or work on creating something better for the future. That's what this energy is all about. This is also you getting rid of anything that's not you. So if you have taken on roles, if you've taken on identities, if you've taken on anything that is not true to you and who you actually are out in the world in order to appease or appeal to others, this is a time where you're going to have to let go of that. It's just going to be stripped away, and you're going to have to rebuild from a place of authenticity. This is also a time where you might have to work a little bit harder when it comes to your physical body, because Saturn in your first house, especially if you're a Pisces, it can place limitations and restrictions on your energy levels. And part of that is because you're going to be carrying more burden. You're going to be feeling like, I have so much work to do right now. Good work in a lot of ways, but it's going to be there. And so this is a time to, get very serious about your health, get very serious about your physicality. This is also a time with Saturn transiting your sign, especially for Pisces, where you have to get very clear on your boundaries. If your boundaries have been too loose, if they haven't been solid enough, if you've been overly sensitive to everything that's going on in your environment, energetically, emotionally, physically, now's a time where you're going to be much more easily able to cut that off and to have solid boundaries when and where you need to have them. The best remedy for too much Pisces energy, too much water, mutability, malleability in the birth chart is a hard transit from Saturn. The best remedy for having very loose boundaries with other people is a very hard transit from Saturn. And so now is a time where you're going to very easily be able to see where your boundaries have become too lax and where you need to strengthen them, and you're going to be easily able to actually do that and to follow through and to create boundaries where boundaries are needed, which is different from a lot of people with that Saturn and Pisces, where there's a lack of boundaries and it's kind of nebulous. For you, it's been nebulous, and you're coming in, Saturn's coming in, and it's causing it to become not that way. And so that's what's going on for Pisces. And so that's the forecast for all 12 signs. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure you hit that subscribe button, because in 2 weeks, I'm going to be giving a 20-year forecast for Pluto moving into the sign of Aquarius, and so you don't want to miss that. So subscribe and hit the notification bell. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you like the video, subscribe to my channel, and share this with your friends if you feel like they could benefit from the information I shared with you today all about Saturn transiting the sign of Pisces. Thank you again so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye, everyone.